السلام علیکم ایوری ون، میں ہوں اریبہ شاہد اور ہم آج کا جو پوڈ کاسٹ ہے، میں ڈسکلیمر کے ساتھ سٹارٹ کر رہی ہوں. ہم آج کا پوڈ کاسٹ اردو میں نہیں کر رہے ہوں گے کیونکہ جو آج ہمارے ساتھ یہاں پر گیسٹ موجود ہیں ان کو اردو سمجھ نہیں آتی، اینڈ فار ہز بینیفٹ ویل بی ٹاکنگ ان انگلش. تو جسٹ بیئر ود می اینڈ آئی ہوپ کہ آپ لوگ پھر بھی جس انٹرسٹ سے ہمارے پوڈ کاسٹ کو دیکھتے ہیں اور سنتے ہیں وہ انٹرسٹ ویور نہیں ہوگا. اور انفیکٹ ہم آج جو کانورسیشن کر رہے ہوں گے دیٹس گوئنگ ٹو ٹاک اباؤٹ ایجوکیشن ان پاکستان آف کورس، بٹ واٹ وی وانٹ آل آف یو ٹو گیدر فرام دس کانورسیشن از اے گلوبل پرسپیکٹو. ہم چاہتے ہیں کہ آپ جو ہے اس آج کی گفتگو کے ذریعے جان سکیں کہ دنیا بھر میں اس وقت، اور خاص طور پہ ابھی جو فلڈز آئے ہیں اس کے بعد، پاکستان میں ایجوکیشن کو ری بلڈ کرنے کے لیے کیا کوششیں ہو رہی ہیں اور کس حد تک ہمیں امید رکھنی چاہیے انٹرنیشنل کمیونٹی سے پاکستان میں ایجوکیشن کو ری بلڈ کرنے کے حوالے سے. سو ہماری کانورسیشن کا جو آج محور ہے وہ یہ رہے گا. So all right everyone, we have in the studio with us today Lars Utchoat, and he is the global program manager for Education Out Loud. Welcome to the podcast, Lars.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So all right Lars, let's start with the basics. What is Education Out Loud? What is it? Obviously we get a sense that it is a global effort to make education stand out, but if you could just sort of unpack what the sort of work it's doing, of course around the world, but then also specifically in Pakistan.
Great. Happy to do that. So, yes, Education Out Loud is a global effort. You can illustrate that by saying that we cover activities in more than 60 different countries, the majority of which are across Asia and Africa, with a bit in Pacific and also a bit in Latin America. But the bulk of our work takes place in Asia and in Africa. It's a fund that is devoted to support civil society. So we work with civil society, but we don't want civil society to be an isolated island on its own. So much of our work is to bring civil society voices to national and international arenas so as to stimulate engagement between NGOs, community groups, and national, local, international authorities. And why do we do that? It's because there is a need for different stakeholders to come together. No single organization, even no single ministry can address the education needs right on its own. There is a need for collaboration, for listening to one another. There is a need to coordinate, to work together, and we support that effort. We do that with reference to global standards. So our work takes a direct starting point in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and many of you will know that Sustainable Development Goal number 4 is about the right to education. So our aim is to ensure that children across all the countries that we cover have access. We don't do that by saying, okay, let's go out and build some schools, or let's go out and train some teachers, because it's a massive effort. It's not our job, but it's also because of the realization that both at the national and international level, standards in many, many places have already been set. We have frameworks that are existing, but they need attention, they need resources, and they need a consistent effort to work. So it's not about bringing about a lot of additional policies, even though here and there are gaps, and we need to bring those gaps to the attention of policymakers. But by and large, it's about ensuring that the commitments that have been made are actually turned into practice. Thank you.
All right, Lars, thank you so much for giving us that overview. Within Education Out Loud, so I was going through some documents, and there was a lot of talk about operational component 1 and operational component 2, and I believe there are 3 operational components as a whole. So what are these OCs, and how do they sort of interlink, and what is their relevance? I mean, you just spoke about the importance of all the stakeholders collaborating, working together to make education possible in the countries where Education Out Loud right now is active, including Pakistan, of course. So if you could just also unpack what these operational components are and how they sort of gel together and make this overall campaign robust.
Good. So taking us a little bit back in history, Education Out Loud owes its existence and its funding to what is called the Global Partnership for Education. It's a multi-stakeholder partnership involving efforts of donor governments, of developing country governments, and also of philanthropic foundations and indeed of civil society in the global north, in the global south, and amongst teacher unions. Now, in its early years of existence, the Global Partnership for Education was funding exclusively national and local authorities. But it also was a realization that there was too little efforts made to make sure that these substantial investments actually led to sustainable and tangible results. So around 2009, Education Out Loud efforts, our predecessor, you could say, which was called the Civil Society Education Fund, started being funded by the Global Partnership for Education, GPE. And the first range of efforts, which still takes up the bulk of our resources, is what we technically refer to as Operational Component 1. It's an effort that focuses on unifying, bringing on one platform the voices, the concerns, the agendas, the priorities of civil society. Because we all know that civil society is not just one effort. It's a multitude of different efforts undertaken by so many individual organizations. But if we want that civil society should gain a voice, should gain access to the places where education priorities are determined and laid out, we also need, not as a basic exclusive requirement, but as one strategy to bring these multitude of voices together. So our OC1, the Operational Component 1, is about supporting national platforms of a variety of different organizations. So we call that national education coalitions. The name and shape of these particular efforts may vary. It has one shape in Pakistan, and it does indeed have a different shape across South Asia or even across Asia and the wider range of countries that we work with. In Pakistan, the Pakistan Coalition for Education is a recipient of funding from Education Out Loud. And that funding enables PCE, the Pakistan Coalition for Education, to bring together a multitude of different individual organizations under one roof, you could say. And it does allow PCE then to go to the government tables to bring a concerted agenda coordinated across this multitude of individual organizations to the attention of national and local authorities. So the Operational Component 1 is the effort to support this joint structures, the joint voices of civil society. We do have then also what we call Operational Component 2, which is focusing on social accountability. And one of the reasons that we have this additional component is that sometimes the sheer diversity of the many individual organizations coming together in PCE may not allow for in-depth efforts around particular issues. So the Operational Component 2 is an opportunity for individual organization to bring to Education Out Loud particular proposals on a more refined, limited agenda. The PCE is expected to cover a wide range of different issues coming up, whereas social accountability in Operational Component 2 is meant to allow for more in-depth effort. It could be around collecting or using data already collecting to talk about education quality. Because we all know that even if you have a unified national curricula, even if you know that you have schools and teachers across the country, the education outcomes vary. They vary for many reasons, and we do actually have data on that, but could we test the validity of those data? Could we ensure that the results coming out of the efforts are actually assessed, and the diversity of outcomes also then addressed? Because let me give you an example. I think the international community and even certainly authorities across Pakistan have been very successful in enhancing access to education. Today, relative to, let's say, 20 years ago, many more children come to school. New classrooms have been erected, more teachers have been employed, and yet we see that in terms of education quality, in terms of the outcome, in terms of the skills that our children bring back from the schools vary substantially. So we need to pay more attention to the outcomes. And this is what operational component 2 is about, or could be about. It's looking at how can we make sure that, for example, the data at local community level is aggregated, is brought to the attention of policymakers at the national level. So this inequality is also being addressed. And then finally, we do have what is called Education Out Loud Operational Component 3, which looks at regional or international or transnational advocacy. Because we also realize that in order to fulfill the right to education, in order to address the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, you can't assume that the efforts of one individual government will do the job. There are international standards, there are international experience, and there are international constraints. So OC3, Operational Component 3, is an opportunity for organizations to join hands to work consistently across the regions, the boundaries between national governments and even national civil society organizations. For example, to say, okay, when governments are collecting taxes, are these taxes from ordinary citizens, are they actually going into education? Do they fund education budgets? And are they used effectively? And can we compare notes about how public funding of education works, so that to bring experience from different countries into one room, and also to allow the national agendas of local civil society to come up at the international level. So when, for example, in South Asia, SAARC ministers are meeting, it would be possible to have a voice into that room from civil society saying, guys, across South Asia, there are a couple of concerning experience that would need your attention. And we can see examples, similarities across the region, or we can see, wow, in that particular country in South Asia, they actually had a novel approach which worked well. So could we use Operational Component 3 also to bring that experience to other stakeholders in other countries, so that we don't remain bogged down by our individual constraints, our individual limited perceptions, but that we bring together a unified effort cutting across regions and even up to the United Nations tables, if you put it that way. So that is the logic of adding to OC1, the national coalition effort, the efforts under OC2, social accountability, in-depth efforts in one particular subfield, and then the transnational advocacy in OC3. So altogether, we are hoping that these individual efforts will enable synergy, will enable civil society to occasionally come out also in a more concerted manner. So those are our ideals. And I said initially that we work in more than 60 countries, and right now we fund projects with a total of 80 different grantees. And let me just end by saying we do not technically have one target. We ask the individual applicants to bring what technically is talked about as results framework. Bring me your results framework, bring me your desire, bring me your objectives, and we'll assess and work with that. We are not saying, okay, this is the global standard and everybody has to address the same agenda, because we realize that the needs in Pakistan is indeed different from what could be the needs in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Vietnam, and across Asia and the wider range of countries that we cover. So I think a unique feature relative to other international programs is that we don't have one global results framework. We support 80 different results framework, and we are encouraging each of our grantees, as we call the beneficiaries, to focus on how can I achieve the objectives, the aims that we have set for ourselves. So I think that's how we work.